Hello, welcome to Good Work Now. Today we're going to talk about toxic coworkers. And let me share some information that was in the April 2009 edition of the Harvard Business Review. As a result of experiencing toxic behavior by colleagues or coworkers, 48% of respondents decreased their work effort, 47% decreased their time at work, 38% decreased their quality of work, 66% said their performance declined as a result of being around toxic coworkers. 80% lost work time worrying about the incident, ruminating about it. 63% lost time avoiding the offender or the toxic coworker. And then 78% said their commitment to the organization declined. So clearly this issue of toxic work environments or toxic behavior, toxic coworkers is very important, and it distracts from productivity and morale. I am very pleased to welcome back to our show Steve Sphar, who's going to help talk with me through this issue of toxic coworkers. And Steve is a leadership consultant, and he helps managers create positive, sustained change in the work environment. He's been doing this work for about 20 years or so, and he was on the show before, and it's great to have you back, Steve, on the show.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
And today, Steve and I are going to talk about three things. What is toxic behavior? And talk a little bit more about why it's important that we talk about it. And then three, offer you some specific tips that you can use yourself to address toxic coworkers in the environment. And Steve, let's go ahead and start with the first area.
You bet.
What is toxic or toxicity in the
Yes.
workplace? What is toxic behavior?
Toxicity, it's a very strong word. It has like this poisonous, corrosive sort of sound to it.
It feels icky.
First of all, I want to really thank you for tackling this subject. Many workers feel good about other parts of their job, but there's someone at work, it might be their boss, it might be a coworker, it might even be the type of customers that come in that they feel are toxic. And it has such a drag on performance, such a drag on morale, their ability to perform their work, and life is just too short to have to go to a job like that. So I'm really glad that you're tackling this subject.
So it's like a poison. It really it impairs the health of the individual and the organization.
Right. It's more than just, it does all the things that you described from the study quoted by the Harvard Business Review, but more than that too, it eats people up. So there's a healing effect that needs to happen after someone's been through toxic behavior. But the way I like to think of toxicity in the workplace is, I would describe it behaviorally.
Okay.
So it's a type of behavior that someone is doing that has a corrosive effect, that causes negative emotions, strong negative emotions to arise in the other person. And it's probably on a continuum. So there's differences in people. And there's some things that some people might consider annoyances or irritations, but what we're talking about here is a level of behavior that really causes the other person to feel vulnerable, to feel like they can't trust. The strong emotions might be anger, might be fear. It's things that are really much more damaging than just annoying behavior. Okay.
So there's a continuum that all of us fall into in terms of how we react. Maybe some of us have more patience than others. So maybe my threshold, for example, of when somebody turns from annoying to toxic would vary. Could be maybe here, and then for somebody else that threshold could be different depending on them.
And the person who's exhibiting the behavior that you find is causing very strong negative emotions in you may not be aware of that. Exactly. They may come from a life history or a background where that sort of stuff is just expected. Could be, some people swear they grew up in an environment or they've worked in other places where that was okay. Could be very, very offensive to someone else.
Exactly. Let's talk about some specific behaviors that, for most people, they're perceived as toxic behaviors. Now, we don't want to stereotype. Not all of these behaviors are necessarily toxic, but generally, folks might perceive them that way.
Right.
What might be some behavioral examples of toxic behavior?
Sure. So bullying would be
Okay.
one. People raising their voice, shouting, swearing. That's usually meant to intimidate.
Okay.
Some people take an opposite effect. They are more withdrawn. They might be more passive aggressive.
Okay.
Gossiping,
Mhm.
saying things behind someone's back rather than going to them.
Right.
Taking credit for work that someone else does, but always wanting to be the person who shines.
Okay.
Another one that is really annoying to a lot of people would be victim behavior. A lot of whining, a lot of complaining.
Very negative.
Right,
Very negative.
right.
Mhm.
Just being a negative person in general. You know, there's a lovable sort of Eeyore sort of quality about some people. They're just more dour. They're just more skeptical or more cynical. But again, here we're talking about a level of complaining and whining and victimhood that really starts to drag the whole team down.
Exactly. And I imagine, too, it's not just verbal behavior, it's nonverbal.
Correct.
As well.
Absolutely.
So bullying, for example, sometimes a person that stands in a certain way with maybe a scowl on their
Meant
face.
to intimidate.
It may be intentionally or unintentionally. Maybe
Right,
that's just
very
the
good point.
way they stand.
Correct.
Or someone who could be very verbal and doesn't feel that they're gossiping, but that's how it's perceived. They're just
Right.
very fluid or very transparent with their thoughts and their feelings.
Right.
So there's that dimension of it as well.
Right.
You know.
And I really like to tie things to these twin aims. Work is really about getting things done. So there's a certain amount that people take pride in their work. People like to be able to use the skills that they're good at.
Right.
So anything in the workplace that detracts from productivity, from people being able to use the skills that they're good at to perform, is a bad thing, and we want to reduce that. So for all the reasons you read in that clip at the beginning of the show, toxic behavior degrades that. But I think good performance goes hand in hand with you feeling good about your work environment. When you're not feeling vulnerable, when you're not feeling like you have to be on your guard or reserved all or most of the time, when you're not that way, you're much more free to be creative, to share information, to have a lot of give and take with your coworkers. If there is someone or several people in your workplace that make that less likely, then you're going to shrink back. So both of these twin aims, feeling good about your work environment and being able to do your job well, are hindered.
Exactly. So this issue of toxicity in the environment is very important for the bottom line.
Right.
That if managers and leaders or employees let it run amok,
Right.
then it's going to detract from business, from
The
performance.
costs of it, I think, are huge.
Exactly.
If you're not able to perform your job, performance goes down. But really more importantly, you go home each night feeling that way. And the cost of that emotionally is huge.
Exactly. I was
Not
just
worth
thinking
it.
about that. You bring that baggage back home.
Good point.
And so you give it a lot of airtime with your partner, spouse, whatever, and then you're bringing that toxicity back
It's
home.
secondhand toxicity.
Yes, exactly. So let's now that we have a sense of what it is and why it's important to address, let's go ahead and talk about some strategies
Sure.
that folks can use to address this issue. And let's start with perception and your
Sure.
thoughts around, because I think that's fundamental, that how human beings perceive
Right.
other behavior in the environment. So what are your thoughts about perception?
Right. So if we're going to define toxicity as a type of behavior that's causing negative emotions to arise in me,
Okay.
we have to remember that emotions are always a factor of interpretation.
Right.
So there's not something out there that happens and it's always, that's something that makes people angry. That's not how it works. Because the same person could slam a book down here and they could be in a jovial mood that you would consider just sort of excited about an idea, or we're going to have some brainstorming now or something. Someone else could see the book slam down and have a fearful reaction.
Exactly.
So the negative emotion that's arising in the person is a function of perception. And all of us have different perceptions of the world. We grew up with different life history. We grew up in different families. We have different families of origin, different backgrounds, different work experience, different life experience that cause us to view things differently.
Exactly. And we all have these filters.
Right.
That we look at the world and then we interpret based
Right.
on all those factors that you talked about.
And I would say there's at least two types of filters.
Okay.
There's one that's general, about just because of the way we've been raised or our life experiences, and then there's specific. If there is a particular person at work that you had run-ins before,
Right.
so you're having a great day,
right.
you've just been complimented by your boss, you've just been given a raise, you turn the corner, and there's Joe. right? The person that you've had previous encounters with.
Exactly.
So what's the feeling in your body as soon as you see Joe?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a shrinking, it's a contracting, it's a fear, and Joe hasn't done anything. But you've got a specific life history with him that causes you to have this filter, this perception.
So maybe a first step, a first technique is to really be in touch with what's happening with yourself.
Correct.
So when you are thinking, oh boy, that person's really toxic, that person drives me crazy, I can't stand being around this person. Why? What's the feeling that you're getting? Are you getting, is it a strong anger, strong fear?
Mm-hmm.
Or what's the emotion that you're feeling?
Let me tell you kind of, I think, what sort of informs that.
Okay.
And it has to do with owning the fact that the reactions are coming up in you and not feeling that it's caused by the other person. If we use labels, if we say, Brian is a bully, Brian is a whiner, Brian is a complainer, Brian is a gossip, all of those are a funny trick of language that take my interpretation of events and pretend to put them out there as a label. Now, if I say Brian is wearing a gray coat, that's a fact. Everyone can see objectively that that's true. Brian is a bully is an interpretation.
Right.
And that's been filtered through my set of perceptions.
Exactly. That's your reality.
Right. So the labels, as soon as you start labeling people, you've already bought in to the cycle of toxicity, and you're helping to promote it.
That's an excellent point.
Can I show you a little exercise
Sure.
to kind of show this? Because all of these filters are here, they're operating all the time, and we don't even know it.
Exactly.
Now, the example I'd like to use is, you've seen a deck of playing cards, I'm sure, or a set of dominoes. So if I show you this, you know exactly what this is. And if I show it to you like this, you also know what that is. You have a certain image of what that is. But if I show it to you like this, something looks
different,
amiss, right? And if I show it to you like this, it looks different.
What's on up your sleeve, Steve?
Right. So it looks like a magic trick, right?
Right.
Now, what I did by saying, you've seen a deck of cards, haven't you? I triggered in you a mental model,
Exactly.
a filter of what always a deck of cards looks like. So when I showed this to you, you didn't just see 5 dots, which is all that was. You filled in with some missing data. You assumed some stuff that was not true. So in some ways, it's a funny little parlor trick game, but I use this in my training classes to show that we don't actually just see reality for what it is. We're always interpreting it. So when Joe walks around the corner, you're not just seeing 5 dots. You're not just seeing Joe and his behavior. You're projecting out a whole bunch of previous life history you have with him or with other people, and you're filling in information. If you went to another culture that didn't have playing cards, and I did this, he wouldn't think in his mind 3.
Exactly.
He would think in his mind 2, because there's only 2 dots.
Actually, I
there.
remember a story that one of my professors told me about her trip to Africa, that they were driving along the dunes, the Sahara Desert, and she was curious how the driver knew where he was going, because she didn't see any roads or signposts. And then she asked him, driver, where are we going? And he goes, we're right on the road. And she goes, where is the road? All I see is sand. And he was adamant that the road was right there, but she couldn't see it because she didn't have that prior experience. So we make assumptions and we draw conclusions based on the available information that we have.
Based on the filters we have, and we fill in a ton of data. So just like when I walk around the corner and I see Joe, and I fill in all this data about Joe's a bully, Joe's a whiner, that he's going to do this again or something.
Exactly.
It's just like filling in this extra dot here.
Exactly.
So that's the nature of perceptions. That's the nature of these filters that are always there. And when we act on them and project out a label and pretend that interpretation by us is reality, we're buying into this cycle of toxicity.
So actually what's really enlightening about this is that even though we may assume toxic coworkers are somebody else, I'm not part of the toxicity, but based on this human nature and the nature of perception, we need to catch ourselves, because we could be contributing to toxicity in the work environment by making assumptions and not checking our filters and that kind of thing.
Right.
Okay, good. Let's talk about sphere of influence a little bit.
Sure.
Sometimes I think when employees are experiencing toxic behavior, there may be a tendency to run to the manager and complain, which may be appropriate in some circumstances.
There's a place for that.
There's a place for that. But as a manager, I always tell my employees, I always encourage
exactly
them.
what I was going to ask you. What's the first thing
The first thing, I'd like my employees to be able to work it out amongst themselves, because I have respect for them being professionals and adults and all that sort of thing, and that they have the skills to have that direct conversation. But so what's your thoughts about sphere of influence, in that we can't change others and that sort of
this
thing?
kind of goes to what we were talking about earlier about how can we make the workplace a place where you feel more empowered, feel more powerful, feel more good at work. Now, I think the area of least return is when we put the power outside of ourselves. So it's very convenient, and there's a tiny, short-term little salve on our wound when we say, Joe is a bully. And then you can even get other people in the office to agree with you.
Exactly.
He did it again? What? Oh, Joe's being a bully again. There's a teeny little bit of feeling good there.
Exactly.
But what we've done is we've thrown everything that you can do about Joe to make things better and more positive in your workplace outside of your own control.
Exactly.
So that's all, Joe's just the way he is.
Right.
How could anyone do that?
Having that common enemy feels good for the short term, maybe.
Right.
But not long term.
You've just locked yourself into a
Right.
feeling of powerlessness.
Exactly.
Now, what if there were, and by the way there are, and we're going to cover them by the end of the show, what if there are things that I can do within my sphere of influence
Exactly.
to make things better? If I can stop labeling Joe and instead just look at his behavior and think, what are the things that I could do to improve that, to make that better? I don't know if Joe will ever change, but I'm now doing something that feels more empowering. I'm taking more control, and in the long run, even though the things that you do there can feel uncomfortable, in the
Exactly.
long run they actually make you feel better.
Right, right. One of the things that happens in these situations is that we have a choice.
Right.
So once we recognize, okay, that perception plays a role here, and I may have filters. I have a choice to make. I can either
Labeling.
I can label and thereby contributing to the toxicity in the work environment.
Right.
Or I can choose to do something else. And there's 4 types of behaviors that I've been exposed to, and I'm sure you have too, Steve, regarding the types of behavior we can exercise in terms of communication. One is being passive, and that's where I choose not to act, and I'm just going to continue to feel bad about it. The second one is passive aggressive, where maybe I am going out, I'm going behind that person's back to reinforce the stereotype. Oh, have you heard what Joe did now? The bully, he's done it again, that kind of thing. Or maybe doing something to even sabotage Joe or make him look bad in some ways. Or I could be aggressive and try to mirror what I perceive to be the aggressive behavior that Joe is displaying. And that could even cycle into a more toxic kind of situation.
Yep.
Or I can be assertive. I can choose to take some ownership of how I'm feeling with Joe's behavior and actually have a conversation with Joe.
Yep. I love what you're saying.
And let's talk about your thoughts about, once I've made a decision that I need to have a conversation with this coworker,
Right.
and I don't want to continue feeling the way I'm feeling anymore, and I don't want to label him, and I don't want to cut him down and talk behind his back. What are your recommendations
This is
on
great.
that kind of conversation?
I love the whole landscape that you just put out there, because when the negative emotion arises in ourselves and we have that choice point, what are we going to do with it? And the first 3 things that you mentioned there are all really ones which contribute to the toxicity.
Exactly.
So I'm now bought into this, and as a matter of fact, the more you do that, the more you help create the conditions that will cause that to be reinforced. I mean, bullies sometimes don't even realize they're bullying, but other people start to act a certain way. Like, some people are just naturally aggressive, and then other people sort of shy away, and they just keep being aggressive because that's all they know how to do. You've actually helped create the situation for that.
So a cycle has been maintained.
Right.
It's been fed.
Right.
By those 3 reactions,
But
being
the
passive.
the fourth one that you mentioned, being assertive,
Okay.
not aggressive back,
Right.
but having a way in order to talk back to Joe. That's the choice point. Most people don't choose that. Most people don't go to Joe and say, well, we'll go through some steps here I want to explain to you in a minute. Most people at that choice point choose to do something else. Be aggressive, go behind the person's back, just forget it. And so what they do is they just sit with that resentment, and they cause all of those bad things that we talked about at the beginning of the show.
Exactly. So why would someone choose not to be assertive? Let's explore that just for a bit. Is it that the fear of the conversation, the assertive conversation with Joe, outweighs the discomfort or the toxicity or the emotion that people are feeling with the behavior?
Exactly.
Is that the weighing that happens, that, and you hear the expression, I can't take it anymore.
Right.
The tipping point. Okay, I'm going to do something about this. I'm either going to complain to my manager, or I'm going to have that conversation with Joe.
Right. And what normally happens, unfortunately, is people stuff their emotions, try to ignore it, thinking it'll go away.
Right.
And then when they reach that tipping point, it explodes.
Exactly. And then they become aggressive.
And in order to justify their extreme anger, they will go into the labeling.
Exactly.
Well, of course I had to blow up. I've had it. You've been hearing me complain for 4 months. Look at all of the reasons why my now toxic behavior is rationalized and okay.
So we become a toxic person ourselves. We become a difficult employee because we're blaming and dodging. We're dodging responsibility and blaming it back on Joe.
Right.
So we're reinforcing, as you said, that dynamic. Very interesting. You have 4 steps that you recommend on having that assertive conversation.
Right.
Share with us the steps.
Sure, you bet. So they basically run like this. You want to state your intention. Well, first of all, everything I'm talking about here is at that choice point.
Okay.
You decide to give feedback and engage in a non-defensive, provoking conversation with Joe, in this case. So you state your intention. You state objective facts. You state the impact that person's behavior is having on you.
Okay.
And you make a request. You ask for the person to do a different behavior.
Okay.
So that seems like a simple set of things to do. It is so difficult for all of us, myself included, to do that. Because to do that, there is an air of vulnerability.
Right.
If I'm not being aggressive and saying, see, if I come to Joe and say, I'm tired of your bullying activities around here, well, how is Joe supposed to react to that?
Exactly.
That's in a way that's going to provoke more defensiveness on Joe's part.
Okay.
So if it goes something like this, Joe, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about, and you may have no knowledge that it's affecting me this way, but when you raise your voice, it really makes me feel uncomfortable inside. And the other day when you slammed the report down on the table and you raised your voice, I was upset. And I would just ask you if, when we're having conversations, even when you're criticizing my work, I'm open to that, but I would like it if you didn't yell.
Good.
Now, I don't know how long that took, 15 seconds or something
Exactly. And let's pretend I'm a gossiper.
Yes.
Let's pretend that you and I work together.
Okay.
And
You and I have worked together.
Do I gossip, Steve?
We'll talk about that after the show.
Right.
I can't do that on the air.
Let's do it live right now. Let's say that you perceive me as gossiping. More specifically, you perceive me as saying bad things about you to other colleagues behind your back.
So I have somehow gotten news that you've been saying things in the workplace about me.
Exactly.
I'm going to assume these are negative things.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Right. So how would you approach me in that situation?
Right. So let me give you an example of how I might say it, and then we'll go back and see how it applies with the 4 steps.
Okay.
So, Brian, do you have a minute?
Sure.
There's something I want to talk to you about. I want to check something out because I've heard some stuff and it's affecting me, and I want to talk to you about it. I have heard from several other people that you have been criticizing the reports that come out of my office. That my staff, you say that the words I've heard is that they're garbage and that they're always late. So I wanted to check with you and see, first of all, is that the sort of language you've been using?
I don't think I use those words, but I was concerned about the reports being late.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
to tell you the truth, I was concerned, Steve, that the reports were late.
Are some of my staff giving you late reports?
Yeah, it happened a couple times.
Okay. I want us to be able to address that because that's something I don't want my staff doing. But when I heard about it from other people, it had an effect on me, which was to feel like my work was not being respected and that you couldn't come to me.
Okay.
Is there anything I'm doing that is making it so that you can't bring these complaints to me directly?
Well, I tried calling once and didn't get an answer on your phone, so...
Well, I want to make a commitment that if you'll bring the complaints directly to me, that's what I would like for you to happen.
Okay.
I will address them very quickly.
Okay. Well, gee, I'm sorry, Steve, that you felt this way, and I can honor that commitment. And so, what's the best way of us getting in touch with each other in the future?
I'm usually by my phone. Usually call.
Okay. So I will try more than once to call. Okay.
Now that one came out very nice because you
were
able to role play that in a way that made it end with a very nice ending. They don't always end that nicely, but just to show the techniques that I use. When I started out, step number 1 is to state my intention. So if I'm going to have a call you on the carpet sort of conversation, I'm going to tell you, hey, I have something I want to bring up, something that's bothering me. I'm willing to own that as my perception.
Exactly.
That puts you on guard. It doesn't make you feel like I'm trying to take you off balance. Stating objective facts. See, for both of the examples I did, both with Joe raising your voice and with Brian the gossip, saying exactly just the objective facts that I've heard. I state them in a way that the other person can agree with. You don't use any sorts of labeling or interpretive filters. Right. You have to state the facts in a way that if a camera had been viewing it, they would back you up. It's exactly objectively what happened that the other person would agree with.
And when you were going through the gossip role play with me, when you described the behavior, it was irrefutable. It was it felt very
Yeah.
objective. I
Well,
didn't,
you could object. I didn't say that.
Right.
Right? And that's fine. Well, I'm glad I brought it to check with
Exactly,
you because this is
exactly.
what I've heard.
This is
Who
what I
said
heard.
that? Well, we can get into that later.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
you cannot object. You cannot say, you didn't hear that.
Right.
No one told you that. Well, I stated it objectively. Someone told me, you said my reports were garbage and you said
Right.
that they were late. Is that true?
Exactly. Right.
So, and then I own the reaction. I don't put any label on you. I say, it's having this effect on me.
Right. And so what you've done is you changed a potentially negative cycle, and you nipped it in the bud. You kind of
That's the hope.
You take the power out of it.
And you can't control, that sphere of influence. All I can control is how I act, which is to try to come to you non-defensively. I can't control how you act. And in those 4 steps, in a sense, I
Right.
care in the longer sense, but in another sense, I don't have to care how or control how you react to that.
Exactly. It's really it's within your sphere of influence, like you said.
Right.
So it's a healthy way of managing your negative emotions in the workplace.
I
in a
really think so.
constructive- in
It
a
channels it
constructive
towards
way.
something. The last 2 parts, the part about stating the impact on you, and then asking the other person. I'm asking this person who I've considered an aggressor against me for something. Both of those last 2 steps make the person feel vulnerable
Right.
already against someone whom, they're feeling negative emotion toward. So that's the main part that causes discomfort in the person who's trying to bring the assertive behaviors.
Right.
A lot of times, the person who's doing the behavior. Sometimes they kind of know they're doing it, and when you call them on it, they will stop. But
Exactly.
also, some people just don't know.
Right. They're
They
blind
don't get the
spots.
feedback.
Exactly. And I think that could be a real gesture of trust. When someone, like that olive branch kind of thing, when someone's reaching out like that and,
Right.
and opening themselves up a little bit to vulnerability, then that could actually be a trust deposit, if you will,
That's
into
a
that
great
relationship.
point.
Steve, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, coming back to talk with us about toxic coworkers and toxic environments. Let me go ahead and provide you some contact information for Steve Sphar. His website is www.stevespar.com, and his email is steve@stevespar.com. His phone number is 916-739-8057. And next week, we're going to be talking about marketing makeover, how to improve your career marketing or your business marketing. And so I think we're going to have a really good show next week about that. And if you're interested in giving me any feedback about today's show, any comments you have about toxic coworkers, please email me at brianmoffitt@comcast.net or visit our website at www.goodwork.com, goodworknow.com. And until next time, keep up the good work, and thank you for watching.